He woke not to light but to pain. Every breath scraped like fire through his ribs, where bruises bloomed purple and yellow, flowers painted in agony. Around him, the stone walls loomed, damp and silent, stripped bare like memory itself. No windows, no clocks, only smell. The thick metallic scent of dried blood, sweat, fear, and the pungent trace of olive oil, the kind used not for cooking, but for parading flesh. It still clung to his hair, his skin, like the ghosts of the previous night's ritual. A ritual they called entertainment. Somewhere in the main house, laughter echoed. Not the warm kind. No, this was laughter that sliced, arrogant, indulgent, and hollow, like wolves celebrating over broken bones. He curled into himself instinctively. His hands, still shaking, searched the floor for the thin tunic he'd thrown into the corner last night. A pathetic excuse for clothing. It clung to nothing, protected nothing, and existed only for appearances. 15. At least he thought he was 15. He had stopped counting birthdays the night they dragged him away, screaming, kicking, calling for his mother, while his father stood silent like stone. He remembered the silver coins, the sound they made falling into his father's palm, the way sunlight danced on their surfaces, each flash a year of his life exchanged, one by one, and the words, "Just a few years. You'll return a man. You'll be safe." Lies, all of it. The steps came next, heavy, purposeful, sandaled feet on marble floors. He knew that sound. Everyone in the basement did. The overseer, a man carved from punishment, towering, scarred, and cruel in ways that didn't need words. His silence spoke in bruises, his glances in broken ribs. He opened the door with a scraping shriek of metal against stone, letting in a sliver of daylight as sharp as any blade. The boy squinted, raising a trembling hand to shield his eyes. And there he stood. Demetrius, the gatekeeper of suffering, a former slave turned master of torment. "Clean yourself," he growled, throwing a damp cloth to the floor. "The master has guests tonight, important ones." His eyes dragged slowly across the boy's body, cold and appraising. "You'll help entertain them." The boy didn't speak. His throat was dry, his mind quieter still, because he already knew. He'd known since that first night in the city when they oiled his body and paraded him like a show animal. When they told him he was property now, an asset to be polished, not a person to be protected. Athens, they said, was the jewel of civilization, the cradle of democracy, the land of poets and philosophers. But for boys like him, it was a gilded prison, a beautiful whitewashed nightmare, a place where the symposiums were praised in books, yet never mentioned the hands that bled to serve them, the children silenced behind the marble columns. No one taught you in school that Socrates drank his wine while fondling boys like him. No one said that justice had two definitions, one for citizens and one for slaves. The boy dipped the cloth into the basin and wiped the dried blood from his thigh. The sting meant nothing now. The body, after a while, stopped feeling. It became just a costume, something to drape, to display, to endure. He would be cleaned, oiled, clothed in a sheer tunic meant to reveal, not conceal. He would serve wine, feed grapes, smile when summoned, obey when touched. Tonight again, his dignity would be carved apart, one laugh at a time. And when it was done, he would return to the windowless room, lie on the straw and stare into the dark ceiling as if it could offer stars. But there were no stars here, only silence and memory and the slow, excruciating death of a name that no one remembered anymore. No one explained, no one needed to. One morning, he was dragged from sleep, a cold iron collar locked around his neck, wrists chained and fastened to a line of others. Boys and young men, some no older than 10. Their bare feet cracked and blistered on gravel paths, as if learning to forget the softness of grass, the coolness of streams, the feeling of home. They were a slave caravan, no names, no identities, just product, sorted by height, weight, and price. He remembered his village, a small valley nestled between green hills, bathed in sunlight and the scent of olive trees. Mud brick houses, thatched roofs. One room for the whole family. Cramped, yes, but filled with warmth. Then came the drought. Week after week, the sun blazed like a curse. The olive trees withered, wells dried, goats collapsed in the dust, children cried with parched throats, and silence replaced laughter. That was when the merchants arrived, not selling salt, not selling cloth. They came selling hope and buying flesh. His father's hands trembled as he accepted the silver coins, bright, heavy, and final. His mother turned her face away as strangers examined her son's teeth, shoulders, thighs, like livestock. Just 20 years, they said, he'll return a man, with land, with a wife, with a future. They lied, or maybe they believed their own lies. But to him, that promise was a velvet-wrapped funeral. The journey lasted weeks. By day, they marched. By night, they were staked to the earth like dogs. The younger boys cried until they couldn't anymore. The older ones said nothing, as if silence itself was armor. He passed through landscapes that would have once taken his breath. Rolling olive groves, sparkling coastlines, pine-covered hills where eagles soared. But he saw none of it. His world had shrunk to a chain around his neck and the rhythm of feet against dirt. Sometimes visitors came, well-dressed men with perfumed robes and gleaming rings. They walked the line, inspecting the merchandise. Some were looking for field labor, some house servants. But a few were different. They didn't inspect muscle. They looked at faces, eyes, lips, the curve of a collarbone. And when they touched, it lingered, slick and possessive, like oil. By the time he reached the slave market in Athens, cruelty no longer hid behind any mask. It stood proudly in the open, dressed in gold. The stench was suffocating. Unwashed bodies, urine, blood and fear mingling into a perfume of despair. Cries, bargains, screams, laughter. He stood naked, skin slick with olive oil, made to glisten like marble. Not to be praised, to be sold. "Look at this one," the auctioneer bellowed. "Unspoiled, handsome, not yet hardened by labor, perfect for noble service." The crowd stirred. Bidding began. He didn't understand the words, only the tones. How quickly voices turned from curiosity to hunger. The man who bought him had soft hands and cold eyes. His name was Lysander. The boy didn't yet know what that name meant. Later, he would come to dread it like a curse. Lysander didn't speak much. He didn't need to. One look was enough to claim possession. He didn't buy a boy. He bought silence, obedience, and pain, wrapped in youthful skin. Then came the villa. Columns like ivory spears, painted walls of gods and myths, courtyards wide enough to fit his entire village, servants young and beautiful drifting through the halls like ghosts. But no one smiled, no one met your eyes. The silence was not peace, it was rot. And that was where the boy would live, if what awaited could still be called living. The villa shimmered with preparation. Servants scurried like shadows, scrubbing floors that would soon be stained again, lighting lamps that would cast long silhouettes on painted walls. Incense burned in gold-plated bowls, masking the stench of anticipation. Tonight, the master was hosting a symposium. The word echoed through the halls like a sacred spell. A celebration of thought, of philosophy, of elegant conversation among refined men. That's what the world believed. But the slaves knew better. Especially the beautiful ones. He had been bathed twice, scrubbed until the skin peeled, until the bruises were raw and glistening. Oil was rubbed into his arms, his chest, his thighs. Then came the tunic, thin, nearly transparent, clinging to him like regret. A strip of cloth pretending to be dignity. Jewelry was fastened around his wrists. A necklace of copper rested on his collar like a leash. The overseer looked him over, adjusted the fold of fabric on his hip, and nodded, satisfied. "You'll serve Lysander's couch tonight," he said. "Pour well, smile often, do not flinch." The boy said nothing. The lesson had long since sunk in. Speaking invited punishment. Silence was survival. When the guests arrived, the house changed. Laughter rang louder, wine flowed faster. The walls, normally dead with cold beauty, began to pulse with heat and greed. They were philosophers, politicians, merchants, men of influence with reputations carved into stone. They spoke in eloquent tones about the Republic, about the soul, about justice and logic. Their words floated like perfume. But their eyes lingered. He served wine with practiced grace, stepping lightly between couches arranged in a semicircle. Platters of olives and figs, bowls of roasted meat, more wine. Always more wine. As the evening wore on, the shift came slowly, like rot behind a painted mask. First, a guest asked him to sit nearby. Then another requested a song. Someone laughed and pulled him into a lap. Fingers brushed his arm, a hand pressed too long on his waist. Lysander watched it all with a casual smirk, sipping wine and saying nothing. Then one man, grey-haired, gold-ringed, belly round with indulgence, crooked his finger and said, "Come here, little one, sit, share my wine, tell me where you're from." He obeyed, he always obeyed. The questions were soft, disarming. Do you miss your home? Did you have siblings? Did they cry when you were taken? Then the hand on his back slid lower. The questions stopped. The others were watching now, the room quieting, interest sharpening. He tried to pull away, gently. The hand gripped harder. The room went still. And then, laughter, not his. Rough hands, torn fabric, the taste of wine and bile. The floor cold against his knees, voices jeering. No rescue, no protest. Only a game they played with a human soul. When it was over, he was no longer a boy. Not in any way that mattered. They called it entertainment. They called it tradition. They called it nothing at all. He returned to his cell without speaking, without weeping. The other boys did not ask what had happened. They already knew. They had lived it, were still living it. He lay in the dark, the tunic still torn, the necklace still shining. He stared at the ceiling and wondered, if the gods watched, did they look away? Or did they applaud? There would be more nights, worse ones. The blade had entered, but it had not yet twisted, and deep inside him, somewhere small and buried, something whispered, survive. Even if survival meant turning into something else, something that could never go home again. Time passed without hours, without days, without seasons. Time in Lysander's house was measured in silence, in bruises, in the number of nights you were summoned and the number of nights you were not. He no longer flinched, not when fingers touched him, not when voices called for the pretty one. He had learned to become soft and pliant, like oil. He had learned when to smile, when to lower his gaze. He had learned that asking why was a dangerous indulgence. And slowly, quietly, he began to forget. It started with his name, not the Greek one they gave him, Orestes, which meant nothing to him, but the name his mother once whispered into his hair while rocking him to sleep. That name began to fade, first at the edges, then at the center. Then came the face. He could no longer summon her face. He remembered warmth, a voice, the smell of bread baking in the morning, but not her eyes, not her hands, not her laugh. He was becoming a ghost, not dead, but not alive in any way that could be reclaimed. The villa operated like a temple to controlled beauty and controlled violence. Every gesture had rules, every glance had weight, every mistake had consequences. The slaves called it the rhythm. You learned it or you suffered. There was Marcus, who had once tried to run, caught, chained outside for 2 days without water. There was Alexios, who defied a guest's request. His back never healed. And then there was Philemon, the youngest, who stopped speaking altogether. Philemon hummed lullabies in a language no one else understood. He said they were for the dead. He said they were for the pieces of themselves that kept dying, one by one. One evening, Lysander hosted a smaller gathering. Older men, quieter, with the air of thinkers. They drank slower, spoke of the nature of justice, of Plato's ideal state. They debated whether virtue was learned or born. He stood near the wine jar, silent and invisible, as they discussed the natural inferiority of certain souls. One guest quoted Aristotle, "Some are born to rule, others to be ruled." He felt the sting of recognition, not in their words, but in their ease. They raped by night and rationalized by day. They spoke of virtue while drinking from cups he polished with shaking hands. He realized then the horror wasn't that they didn't know what they were doing. The horror was that they did and didn't care. He was not property because of ignorance. He was property because of choice. That night, he returned to his cell and did not lie down. He sat with his back against the stone wall, arms around his knees, and stared into the dark. Something stirred, sharp, unwelcome, almost painful, a memory, a voice. His father, years ago, lifting him into the air and laughing. The memory didn't comfort him. It wounded. It reminded him of what he was no longer allowed to be. But he did not push it away. He let it live, just for a moment. Just long enough to remember that he had once been a boy with a name. A boy who could laugh. A boy whose body belonged to no one but himself. In the darkness of that stone cell among a house of ghosts, something inside him whispered, "I was real once. And if I can remember that, even if just for a moment, then they haven't taken everything." He was no longer the newest. That title now belonged to a boy no older than 12. Skin still soft, eyes still bright, voice still breaking. The kind of face that buyers called unspoiled, the kind of fragility that fetched high prices. The boy clung to silence like a shield, but silence was never enough. He watched from the shadows as the child was led to his first symposium, watched the tremble in his steps, the hesitation in his hands, watched the men lean forward, smiling the way lions smile before they tear. And something in him, a thing he had buried under years of numbness, moved. Later that night, back in the cell, Marcus approached him. Marcus, the limping boy who once tried to run and failed. Marcus, who now served Lysander's wife and no longer bore fresh wounds. He said nothing, simply pressed a small, sharp object into his hand. A shard of metal, shaped like a blade, no longer than a finger. Rough, crude, but effective. "Do what you must," Marcus whispered. "You have the right to end your story your way." Then he vanished into the corridor. He held the shard for hours, staring at it as if it were a piece of his soul that had broken free and returned. Its edge caught the flickering lamplight. It could open a vein, it could gouge an eye, it could pry open a lock. It could give him a choice. No one had offered him a choice in years. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he imagined different endings. Not freedom, no, that was a fairy tale, but a kind of agency. A moment of decision, a defiance whispered into a world built on submission. Option 1, escape, try to run, risk capture, torture, death, but die his way. Under open sky, perhaps, even a single night of wind and starlight might be worth the price. Option 2, use it on them, on Lysander, on the Overseer, a flash of blood, a moment of justice, and then, inevitably, death. Option 3, use it on himself. To end it, to reclaim the only thing left untouched, his death. A gesture that said, "You do not own this part of me." Each option sang with temptation. Each held the bitter taste of power. But when dawn crept through the cracks in the stone, he made a fourth choice. He wrapped the blade in cloth. He tucked it under the floorboard of his cell, behind a loose stone he'd long ago memorized. He left it there, not for himself, but for the next boy. The next child who would arrive with eyes too wide, with hope not yet torn to shreds. For someone who still believed they were human. He passed the choice on, and in doing so, reclaimed something deeper than freedom. He reclaimed will. They came for him later that morning. He was no longer entertaining. Too old, too silent, too invisible. They told him he was being sold, to the mines. Everyone knew what that meant. No one came back from the mines. He did not cry. He did not resist. He simply stood, lifted his chin, and walked. And in his cell beneath the stone, a sliver of steel waited. For another hand, another soul, another story not yet ended. The journey to the mines was colder than expected. Not in temperature, but in silence. The guards didn't speak unless to bark orders. The cart creaked over stone roads that twisted through ancient mountains, places he once knew from childhood stories, places that now meant nothing. But he remembered. He remembered the streams where he once caught fish with his bare hands, the fields where he chased goats barefoot, the ridge where the wind sang like flutes through the pines. He did not try to run. The chains were too tight, the guards too many, and besides, where would he go? Who would he be? He no longer hoped for escape. He simply wanted to remember, to say goodbye to the world as it was before descending into the world beneath. The mines were worse than rumor. A vast, suffocating underworld of tunnels carved into the ribs of the earth. The air thick with dust and despair. The ceilings low enough to stoop. The walls always damp. The sound of pickaxes, coughing, and the quiet groan of dying men echoed endlessly. No sunlight, no names, just quotas. Each man was given a tool, a number, and a space to die in. The boy, now no longer a boy, was assigned to the salt tunnels. Salt burned every cut, every blister. The dust sank into lungs, settled in blood, scraped against sleep. Most lasted months, some weeks. He lasted longer, because he had already died once, in Lysander's house. What was left could endure more than flesh. But even here, he found something unexpected. The slaves had built a kind of secret world. They shared food in whispers, took turns standing guard for the sick, traded stories under the guise of silence. They remembered their homelands, their mothers' songs, their gods. They carved messages into the walls in forbidden languages. They didn't rebel, they remembered. That was their rebellion. He listened to them, and then, one night, he spoke. He told his story. The village, the market, the house, the blade. They listened, not with pity, but with recognition. They passed the story along, slave to slave, tunnel to tunnel, like smuggled fire in the dark. "You are the boy with the blade," they whispered, "the ghost who left a weapon for the living." He became part of their memory, a name carried in breath, a truth they refused to let the stone erase. The end came without violence. A collapse, sudden, final. One moment he was swinging his pick, the next the ceiling groaned and fell. When they pulled him from the rubble, his chest was crushed, his breath shallow. He knew it was over, but he did not scream. He smiled, not because he was free, but because he had made something that would outlive him. As he lay dying, hands pressed to his wounds, he whispered the names of others. Marcus, Philemon, Alexios, his mother. He remembered them. He let them live, one last time, in the air between his lips. And then, in a shaft of darkness deeper than any sky, he became the dust. But not forgotten. Centuries passed, names faded, statues rose where whips once cracked, temples gleamed where bodies once bled. Athens, beloved Athens, became legend, a cradle of democracy, a beacon of philosophy, a birthplace of beauty. Tourists came with cameras and guidebooks. They stood in marble courtyards once slick with blood. They gazed at mosaics made by hands that never held freedom. They whispered admiration for columns carved by boys who died nameless in mines. No one mentioned the slaves, not in the tours, not in the textbooks. Philosophers were praised for their logic, politicians for their speeches, poets for their verse. No one read the verse carved with nails into the stone walls of slave cells. No one translated the songs hummed in dead languages by dying boys. But the stone remembers. Beneath the Acropolis, beneath the villas now eroded into dust, beneath the palaces of men who once declared themselves gods, the echo still lingers. Sometimes, in the quiet corners of museums, a scholar pauses before a fragment of pottery etched with strange symbols. She feels a chill, though no window is open. She cannot name the feeling, but it clings to her like a forgotten language. Sometimes, a child wanders too far in a ruin, presses his hand against a wall, and dreams of chains he's never seen. The ghosts speak softly. They do not want vengeance. They want witness, to be seen, to be remembered. To have someone, somewhere, whisper, "I hear you." The boy with the blade is gone, his bones dust, his voice long silenced. But his story did not die in that mine. It traveled, on breath, on scars, on hidden songs. It reached the mouth of another slave, and another, until one day it reached you. And now you know. You've seen the marble, you've heard the poetry, you've read the names of kings and thinkers. But now you know what lies beneath. You close the book, you lock your phone, you exit the museum. But the story lingers. It's in the curve of every marble statue you once admired, now veined with unseen pain. It's in the quiet between lines of a philosopher's text, where beauty and brutality once drank from the same goblet. You look around the modern world, built of glass and algorithms, and you want to believe we've evolved. You want to believe that slavery is history. That exploitation lives only in books. But you've learned too much to believe that now. Somewhere in a textile factory, a child threads a needle until her fingers bleed. Somewhere in a mining shaft, a boy no older than 10 inhales dust he will never outlive. Somewhere in a hidden room, behind a locked door in a city just like yours, another child waits to be entertainment. We do not call them slaves. We call them outsourced, runaways, undocumented, troubled youth. We call it industry, or the cost of doing business, or content. We no longer use whips and chains. We use poverty, desperation, algorithms. We hide it better. We name it differently. But the machine is the same. The boy with the blade is not just a ghost of history. He is the breath behind every system that feeds on silence. And now you must ask yourself, what will you do with the echo in your hands? Will you look away, as so many have? Will you wrap yourself in the comfort of beauty, brilliance, and denial? Or will you carry the names? Will you say the stories that were never meant to be told? Will you tear down the myth that civilization is clean? We are not separate from the past. We are its children, its inheritors, its caretakers, its accomplices. So remember this: the symposium never ended, it simply changed its clothes. And the blade, the small hidden blade left beneath the floorboard, it still exists. Not of metal now, but of words, of truth, of witness. And in this moment, with your eyes open, your silence broken, and your mind trembling on the edge of discomfort, you are holding it,